Welcome back. So when this channel started back in 2016, 8 years ago, and I was working full-time at a job I didn't really like, and I was doing videos after work was done or on the weekend, I learned pretty early on I like making lists, which I kind of knew anyways, but I like doing list videos for the internet. Over the years, some of the backlash with lists has been, it got to a point at one stage where I thought, I don't know if it's worth doing the lists. And so I've really pulled back on them in general over the years, but I feel like I'm costing myself on content that I enjoy making, that there are people who enjoy watching. Yes, there's going to be people who get really mad at this list and get really, oh, how can you have that guy at number 2? How can you have this guy at number 10? How dare you? I said, good day, sir. But I like doing list videos. It's the middle of the summer. Why not? So I will be doing redrafts this summer, and there will definitely be some lists. Now, a list I did back in 2016 I wanted to update because I didn't have whiteboards at the time. I just sat on a couch and talked to people. There wasn't cards. There was nothing. It was just you had to watch me ramble. So people that get mad, he doesn't put in chapters. It used to be worse than that. So the list is going to have changed from where it was 8 years ago. And I didn't watch the video through from 8 years ago. I did look at the comment section, and I didn't necessarily take into consideration what was said in there as much. But I did note that there were some that people felt like maybe I wasn't as generous to or too generous to. And I've adjusted. Definitely adjusted in the rankings I've got here. So it's 1 through 20. This is for my time watching hockey. So Bobby Orr's not on the list. Eddie Shore's not on the list. Doug Harvey's not on the list because I didn't watch them play. Larry Robinson is an honorable mention because at the time I was watching him play, he wasn't quite the defenseman he'd been before. And so for Robinson, it's an honorable mention. He won his last Norris Trophy in 1980. Honorable mentions as well to Brent Burns, Larry Murphy, Scott Stevens. I went back and forth on whether or not to put Scott Stevens on the list and decided no, he's not quite going to block out number 20 on the list. Number 20 on the list, Duncan Keith. And when I did my video on players that it looked weird seeing him in jersey that wasn't the one they normally had worn before that, I had in mind Duncan Keith when he left Chicago, but it didn't end up making that top 16. Duncan Keith does end up in the top 20 defensemen. Stanley Cup wins, yes. A couple of Norris Trophy wins, also a yes there. And for Keith, he sacrificed his body out there playing a lot, and so he ends up 20th on the list. So again, I will do my top 20. You guys can let me know your own top 20 if you want. Number 19. This is where I started having trouble already. I went back and forth a bit on this one too. Zdeno Chara, surprisingly, only won the Norris Trophy once. Zdeno Chara won that with the Boston Bruins, and that was after coming over from Ottawa. Zdeno Chara, arguably one of the most intimidating defensemen ever to play the game. And being an intimidating player, it definitely helped that he was also a very good player. Zdeno Chara, 6'9", and will always be remembered by me as the first hockey player that I saw in person that I was like, okay, that just doesn't look real. He looks like he's maybe too big to be out there on the ice with everybody else. And Chara was really, really impressive during his run as well. So he ends up 19th on the list. Number 18. Yeah, this is another one. This one's tough because when I was getting this video ready, and I thought, all right, I'm going to look at some other lists. And man, you want to talk about differing opinions. There are those who have said over the years that I'm not very fair to Paul Coffey. Paul Coffey won 3 Norris Trophies. There was an argument every time he won it because Paul Coffey was as much of a rover for the Edmonton Oilers as a defenseman. He became a better defenseman later in his career. Once he got to Detroit, he had to learn the defensive side of the game a little bit better. Paul Coffey, therefore, does belong in the top 20 in my eyes, but I went back and forth on where to put him on the list. So Coffey at 18 is where I finally settled on this, as I've gone over this list for well over an hour now. And I'm like, all right, this is as good as the list is going to get. And again, you guys can let me know your thoughts. But to me, Paul Coffey does belong in the top 20. I just couldn't justify having him ahead of those who are where they are, including a player who had two Norris trophies, Rod Langway. We talk a lot about how offensively minded defensemen get preferential treatment from Norris Trophy voters. And I'm not going to disagree with that. I'm not. I think that Rod Langway was the exception to the rule because he was very good defensively. Now, people have gone back over his stats and, well, his plus minus wasn't great here, or, well, and in reality, this and this and this. But for people who watched him play, Langway was fantastic. On a blue line in Washington that was not always fantastic. And going back to that trade, that was one that I still feel like Montreal, if they could go back and do it over again, they wouldn't. I think they would have held on to Rod Langway and found a different way to make a trade. Langway was absolutely fantastic. There is still that push for let's name a trophy after the best defensive defenseman, and Langway's name comes up a lot, although that may very well change to a Slavin trophy. Because it feels like now Jacob Slavin, we've talked about a lot, he doesn't make the top 20, so we can have a debate about that as well. Number 16. So this is a list with the idea of if nobody played hockey starting tomorrow, that's it, everybody's career ends, I would put Quinn Hughes here. Quinn Hughes has made just such incredible improvements in his defensive play since he first committed to the league. When he first committed to the league, the defense was bad. It was downright bad. And there were times he'd make drop passes that, to this day, I don't know where those were going, but they didn't go to a teammate. But Quinn Hughes over the years has really become one of the best defensemen in the league. He wins the Norris Trophy this year, putting up a ton of points. And when we look at Hughes and Makar, they're right there trying to set records for points and the fastest to get there while still being very good defensively. And at this point, I think Quinn Hughes on the defensive side is underrated a bit. So I'm okay with Quinn Hughes being on the list. I think that Quinn Hughes is going to rewrite the record books for the Canucks. Definitely for their blue line, he's going to end up being their all-time leading defenseman in terms of scoring soon enough. But yeah, Quinn Hughes, I feel like at 16, absolutely. At number 15, another current player, Adam Fox. Divisive. Adam Fox is such a divisive figure. In that there are those who think he's overrated. I'm sure there will be those who get upset he's on the list here. But he did have a Norris Trophy win. And I'm just going to say it. I think if you can be underrated as the Rangers' top defenseman, Adam Fox might be that right now. He's very smart defensively. He's very good offensively. He doesn't make a lot of mistakes. He just doesn't. The defensemen on this list can't be guys who make a lot of mistakes because that undermines the whole defensive aspect of it. I feel like with defensemen, when they make the mistakes, they're really remembered for more than forwards because you're that last line of defense. So, outside of the goaltender, of course. When a goalie makes a mistake, we all know. But Adam Fox, I think, legitimately belongs in this top 20. I don't think there's any reason he can't be that high. I'm sure the internet will tell me that he can't be, but at any rate, I have him at 15. At 14, I have, didn't change him either. Went back and forth a little bit on some, but I did not change this ranking. Erik Carlson has 3 Norris trophies. I know that in light of him winning it last year, I saw a lot of posts about, he wasn't that good. It's just San Jose was terrible. There might be a little bit of something to that. However, the overall numbers, Carlson had a great season in 2022-2023. He had a good year in Pittsburgh, not the offensive numbers he would have wanted. But if you look at the defensive and the advanced stats, he didn't hurt them much. And I think Carlson legitimately belongs on the list. Carlson and Coffey are two that are cut from a very similar cloth, where the offense is absolutely ridiculous. The defensive part of the game, at times, we can have that discussion, but Carlson has been quite good. In fact, there was one year that the advanced stats, the regular stats, everything looked great for Carlson, and then he didn't win the Norris Trophy that year. So while some may take issue with him winning the Norris Trophy when he definitely could have had more Norris Trophy wins than he has to this point. So I'm fine with having him at 14th. At 13th, with a single Norris Trophy win, but I'm just going to say it, the combination of talents that Roman Josi has, And I'll also throw this in. Shea Weber is not on the list. Shea Weber did not qualify for the top 20. So honorable mention to Shea Weber. Roman Josi, in my eyes, definitely qualifies. And once Weber moved on, Josi got better. If there's one defenseman that I felt like might have upset Quinn Hughes for that Norris this year, it was Josi. He had a monster second half to the season. And now they've added Marchessault. They've added Stamkos. Josi's numbers could go up this year. Josi could have a monster season and maybe win himself another Norris Trophy. When he signed that contract, a lot of people thought it was too much money for too long. I did not agree with that. I felt like he was worth every penny. And to this day, he is still one of the best defensemen in the National Hockey League. And I think 13th is a good spot for him. At number 12. 12 is... There we go. Another current defenseman. So Cale Makar lands at 12th. And I went back and forth on Makar a bit. Makar, Fox, Hughes, all may very well be top 10 if I do this video again 8 years from now. So there you go. 8 years from now, we'll make that date, and I'll be back, and we can talk about it then. But Cale Makar, to me, absolutely belongs on the list. You can make an argument for the Norris Trophy for him almost any season. And when we're talking about this year, and I hear people talking about, all right, Makar wasn't as good this year as normal. Go look at his numbers. He was fantastic. So if we're going to have the argument that Makar had a down year, it's still better than what 90% of defensemen in the NHL can dream of. And, you know, that might actually be kind of generous considering that's 10% of defensemen that might be able to have a Makar. Yeah, sure. I'm feeling charitable. Sure. 10% of defensemen could reach Makar-like numbers from this past season. Why not? But yeah, Makar's been absolutely fantastic. He's got a Stanley Cup ring to his name. He's got a Norris Trophy. It's only a matter of time before there's other hardware in his hands. Number 11. I wasn't sure where to go with that, and I was like, we'll just go with hands. Number 11, just outside the top 10. It's interesting too, because as I go through this, I'm like, people disagree on, and I think with all defensemen, people disagree, including Drew Doughty. Drew Doughty, the last couple of seasons has been much better. I felt like his play definitely tailed off a bit, but I think he's picked it back up over the last couple of seasons. I think he's been very good. Has he been Norris Trophy level? No. But has he still been very, very good? Yes. Has he been a Norris Trophy winner? Also, yes. There are people who I think don't like Drew Doughty personally, and I think sometimes that may color their perception of the player in general. But yeah, Doughty to me belongs just outside that top 10. The top 10 is kind of tough to get into. So I have Drew Doughty at number 11. Of course, he's got a couple of Stanley Cup rings to his name as well. Number 10, and definitely would be higher if I had watched him play in the 70s. But I didn't watch hockey as a toddler, as a very, very little kid. So apologies, because otherwise, Denny Potvin probably would have been top 5. Denny Potvin, I watched him win the Cup in 81, 82, and 83, and then go all the way to the final in 84. And he was their leader. He was their captain. He was fantastic. A really, really good all-around defenseman. When you talk about all-around defensemen that can kind of do a little bit of everything, Potvin may very well be the one you think about. And rightfully so. Potvin, just absolutely incredible numbers throughout his career. And I felt like he retired before he reached the stage that NHL teams would have told him to retire. I think he retired at the right time and near the top of his game. And so, yeah, Potvin ends up in the top 10 for me. Again, if I'd watched him in the 70s, he might have ended up in the top 5. Number 9 on the list. Who did I end up settling with at 9? So there's 12, there's 11. There we are. No, it's not 9 at all. There we go. Number 9. He's currently a general manager. Before that, Rob Blake was a fantastic defenseman, whether it was in LA, whether it was in Colorado, San Jose. Rob Blake was very good at what he did. And good two-way defenseman. Yep, some toughness there, absolutely. Rob Blake was a pain to play against and seemed to be a really popular guy to play with. So Rob Blake ends up in the top 10. And again, it's in that era where we started seeing more of an effect of players need to be able to play on the defensive side as well as the offensive side. So as we came out of those, run and gun 80s and we got into some more structure, guys like Rob Blake really came to the fore. Number 8 on the board. I kind of went back and forth on this guy too. And you want to talk about surprises. Al McKinnis only having won one Norris Trophy, a bit of a surprise, but there was somebody who kind of dominated that era. So Al McKinnis, arguably the most frightening slap shot of his era. Shattered some ankles, definitely, with that slap shot. And he was pretty fearless with it because he's the one shooting it. Why would he? But I will say this: McKinnis was also, I thought, better as an all-around defenseman than maybe he got credit for, and brought a really strong game to Calgary first, and then to St. Louis as well. He was very, very good in St. Louis. A huge part of some dominant early '90s teams for the St. Louis Blues, and so I felt like McKinnis belongs in the top 10. Number 8, number 7 on the list. Not necessarily a player that was one of my favorites when he played, but Chris Chelios played forever, and he was very effective later in his career. I've talked about draft picks and how they reinvent themselves later on. Defensemen, the example of that would be how they go from being that top 2 guy to being more of a support player and just being really, really solid all around. And Chelios was able to do that. Plus, numerous times in his career, it looked like things were kind of falling off, and then he'd have an absolutely great season after that. So he did very well no matter where he played. He ended up finishing things up in Atlanta. It was a bit of a surprise, and when I was doing the video on players don't look quite right in a certain jersey, Chelios in Atlanta just didn't. It just seemed weird, but he played forever. He was very, very competitive, very good, and if he needed to drop the gloves, he would. He did that on occasion, definitely. I'm thinking of the Montreal-Philadelphia rivalry and Hextall and Chelios and all that. And there were a few punches thrown during all that. Number 6, speaking of a guy who could throw a punch, also named Chris Pronger. Now, to be honest, I couldn't stand Chris Pronger at certain points of his career. I felt like he was a dirty player, and yet he did win a Hart Trophy. He did have some very dominant seasons. When Chris Pronger was at his peak, I don't know if there was anybody who was better. The 1 year he spent in Edmonton showed just how dominant he could be. And then he goes to Anaheim, and he helps them win a Stanley Cup. And Pronger was a huge part of the reason why Anaheim won that Stanley Cup. And that was something that I think a lot of us knew that was quite possible. They already had Niedermayer, and then they added Pronger. It just felt like it wasn't fair to the rest of the National Hockey League. But Pronger was big. He could skate. He had good hands. Did he cross the line? Yes. Does that drop him on the list? For me, no, not really. Number 5. Not named Chris. Brian Leech. I talked about him in the video yesterday now. Him leaving the Rangers and playing for Toronto and Boston looked weird. But Brian Leech was one of the absolute best. Back in '94 when the Canucks lost against the Rangers, there were Ranger players I didn't like. Definitely were a number of Ranger players I didn't like. Leech wasn't one of them. I had no problem with Brian Leech. He was really, really good. And pretty clean players, I remember it too. I don't remember anybody getting mad about anything Leech did out there. And also, I don't remember Ranger fans ever getting mad about Leech and something stupid he did. So, for Fox, who's at 15, he has Leech at 5 to look up to. So, yeah, I think Leech at 5 is the right pick. And again, so Leech never won a Hart Trophy, but I feel like overall in his career, I'd put him just ahead of Chris Pronger. Number 4 on the list. I think this is the only other current defenseman on the list. I've talked for a long time about Victor Hedman. The biggest surprise to me with Hedman is he only has one Norris Trophy win. Now, if we look at Leech, Leech won it twice. Blake won it once. McKinnis won it once. It's almost as if there's a lot of really good defensemen in the NHL, so it's hard to win that trophy more than once. But Victor Hedman, I think, has been the best defenseman in the NHL for, on average over the last 10 years. And while he's taken a bit of a drop because you've got Fox and Hughes and Makar in the league now. So, I mean, he's dropped off a bit, but he's still one of the absolute best. When you look at the season he just had in Tampa, Sergachev got hurt, so Hedman's production goes right back up through the roof because he can turn it on like that. So, to me, Victor Hedman's one of the best defensemen, I think, in the league's history. I think first ballot Hall of Famer. In fact, almost any of the defensemen on this board should be in the Hall of Fame, and if they're not, they should get there soon enough. Of course, you have to retire first, so for the guys that are active, not so much of a case of that happening. But Hedman, a huge part of the reason why Tampa's been so good for the last decade. He was a fantastic draft pick for them. It was back in 2009, right? So they draft Stamkos, then they draft Hedman. It goes a long way towards Tampa being good for a long time. Number 3 on the list, and only one Norris Trophy. Again, this just really surprises me. Scott Niedermayer. Throughout Scott Niedermayer's career in New Jersey, there was speculation that if he played somewhere outside of New Jersey, he'd probably get more points. And I think that's true. I think that once he got to Anaheim and we saw his scoring jump, you realize just how good he was offensively and how well he played in that New Jersey system. And he never complained about not getting as many points as he otherwise might because he was a winner. Niedermayer was willing to sacrifice his personal stats to advance the team's chances of winning in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Absolutely one of the most talented defensemen ever. The fact that, again, Anaheim in 07 had Niedermayer and Pronger, unfair to the rest of the NHL. You have one guy who can play 30 minutes and another guy who can play 30 minutes. That eats up half the clock. And it basically means that you're going to be playing against either both or one or the other at any time in the game. And neither of those scenarios are ones that teams really enjoyed while they were together in Anaheim. Number 2 on the list. I shouldn't even need to look at this point, should I? So if this was a favorites list, Ray Bourque would be at or near the top. And I say at or near because this is not a favorites list. So Bourque, I think, would probably be at the top, but then I get into thinking about some of the other defensemen I've really enjoyed watching. And I will be doing those videos this summer as well on my favorites, which is not the same as the best. Ray Bourque, though, very, very high on this list, would be very, very high on my favorites as well. He was just absolutely fantastic. It was 5 Norris trophies that he won. He is a big part of the reason why guys like McKinnis, Chelios, Blake, Pronger, why these guys didn't get more Norris trophies, because Bourque was hogging them all. Ray Bourque, absolutely one of the best defensemen I ever saw. And as I mentioned in the video yesterday on players playing with teams that it just didn't seem right, I was always sad that he had to go to Denver to get that Stanley Cup ring. I was happy for him when he got it. I thought it was sad that he didn't get it in Boston. It would have meant so much to him if he got that in Boston, understanding how much it meant when he got it in Denver. So number 1 on the board, I don't really need to look, do I? Now, Lidstrom won 7 Norris trophies. The interesting thing with Nicholas Lidstrom is this. There was at least one there where I felt like he might have got that Norris trophy based on reputation. But I'm going to tell you this. Before Lidstrom won his first Norris trophy, I thought he was already the best defenseman in the NHL. So I felt like there were a couple of years there before he won his first where you could make the argument he should have won it. So the idea that maybe one of those 7, and it is 7, right? 7 Norris. But the fact that you can argue maybe one of those Norris, maybe he got on reputation, is countered by the fact that there were other Norris trophies he didn't get that I thought maybe he should have. And Bourque as well had at least 1 year in there where he wins a Norris trophy where you could make the argument it could have gone to somebody else. And then there were years Bourque was fantastic and didn't win the Norris. So the Norris is not like a perfect measure necessarily of who the absolute best defenseman is in the NHL, because it is about the best defenseman that year, which I feel like is a little bit of a different question, but Lidstrom belongs at number 1. So another honorable mention I will give is to Slava Fetisov. Slava Fetisov I didn't see enough of by the time he came over to the NHL. He was older, and even then he was very, very good. And I feel like if not for the car accident that shortened the career of Vlad Konstantinov, Konstantinov might have ended up in the top 20 as well. But there are a lot of really good defensemen who've played over the last 40 plus years. So coming up with the top 20 is not easy. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe in the event you've not done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.